Your father names you on the night he abandons you. Not a beautiful name, not a hopeful name. Rahula. In the language of the early texts, it carries the sense of a binding, a seizing, an eclipse, a chain, a shackle, an obstacle. Your father, the man who will become the Buddha, looks at you, his newborn son, sleeping in the palace, and thinks, "You are the thing keeping me from enlightenment." Then he walks out. For you, it might as well be forever. You grow up hearing stories. Your father found something, changed the world. Thousands follow him now. But he never came back for you. Until 7 years later, he does. And what happens next is somehow worse. This is the story of Rahula, the prince who lost a kingdom, the son who lost a father, the boy who became Buddhism's first child monk. If you watched our video on Buddha's wife Yasodhara, you know half this story. Today, you get the other half. I'm Matt, and you're watching Buddha's Wisdom. Before we tell Rahula's story, you need to understand what makes it so devastating and so complicated. In our video, The Buddha's Wife, The Untold Story of Yasodhara, we showed you the night Siddhartha left, how Yasodhara woke up alone, how she raised their son in silence while the world celebrated her husband's enlightenment. But we didn't show you what it felt like to be that son. Rahula's story isn't mainstream. Most people know the story of him leaving. Fewer know he had a son. Almost nobody knows what happened when they met again. The historical sources, the Pali Canon, Chinese translations, Tibetan texts, preserve something remarkable. This story doesn't comfort you. It shows you what we normally hide. What happens when the person who abandoned you returns and asks you to give up everything else too. If you've ever lived with that kind of absence, you'll recognize him, wondering if you're following the path they wanted or the path you need. Rahula had to choose between two legacies, the kingdom he was born to inherit and something else entirely. Let's start at the beginning. The night Rahula was born, the Shakya court celebrated. An heir, the lineage secured. Siddhartha looked at his newborn son and gave him a name, Rahula. Then he went to Yasodhara's room. We're around 563 BCE. Kapilavatthu is a small kingdom in what we now call Nepal and northern India. Siddhartha is 29 years old, prince, married to Yasodhara, searching for answers to suffering, old age, death. And then his son is born. The Nidana Katha, a collection of birth stories, records Siddhartha's words. An impediment has been born to me. A fetter has been born to me. The name stuck. Rāhula. The name itself becomes a teaching about attachment. Think about children who learn to make themselves smaller so their parents can feel bigger, carrying the weight of their parents' unfulfilled lives. The invisible labels we inherit. Rāhula got his label on day one, and then his father disappeared. According to the sources, Siddhartha went to Yasodhara's room that night, saw her sleeping with the baby. He wanted to hold Rāhula one last time, but he feared waking them, so he left. No goodbye, no explanation. This is the Mahabhinikamana, the great going forth. He thought, if I pick him up, I won't be able to leave. So he chose enlightenment over his son. Rāhula grew up knowing that. Your father looked at you and saw an obstacle, then walked away to be free. Picture being 7 years old. Your father is becoming the most talked about teacher in the region. Kings bow to him. Thousands of monks follow him. You've never met him. Rāhula grows up in the palace at Kapilavatthu. Yasodhara raises him. King Shuddhodana, his grandfather, trains him as heir, warfare, governance, philosophy, everything a prince needs. But everyone knows about the father who left. Yasodhara. We covered her story. She never remarried. Later tradition says she took vows privately. She raised Rahula alone while Siddhartha became the Buddha, the lone mother in a royal court. And Rahula, he heard stories filtering back. Your father sat under a tree for 49 days. Your father defeated Mara and his armies. Your father teaches the end of suffering. The contradiction cuts deep. He ended suffering, except ours? Picture the kid whose dad founded a movement that changed millions of lives, but never called on your birthday. Changed the world, couldn't be bothered to come home. You see his face on banners, hear his teachings quoted, never hear him say your name. You hear strangers say his name with reverence. The texts don't preserve what Rahula said as a child in the palace. Not one line. History keeps the Buddha's words and forgets the child's. That silence is part of the story. Then, when Rahula is 7 years old, Buddha comes back. Not to visit, not to apologize, to completely upend his life, again. Imagine meeting your father for the first time at 7 years old. He's surrounded by monks. Crowds worship him. Your mother tells you, go ask for your inheritance. Buddha returned to Kapilavatthu approximately 7 years after leaving. He traveled with his Sangha, hundreds of monks. King Shuddhodana arranged the meeting. Yasodhara prepared Rahula. Her instruction was simple. Go to your father and ask for your inheritance. She meant the kingdom, the throne, his birthright. The Vinaya Pitaka records what happens next. Rahula approached Buddha in front of the entire court, 7 years old, royal robes, first time seeing his father's face. Father, give me my inheritance. Buddha looked at him. The crowd watched. Buddha turned to Shariputra, his chief disciple. Buddha said, give him the going forth. That's it. No explanation. No asking Rahula what he wants. No consulting Yasodhara. He made Rahula the first child monk, Samanera, in Buddhist history. Gave him the inheritance of the Dhamma instead of the kingdom. We read of King Shuddhodana's fury. First you left, now you take my grandson too? Buddha didn't flinch, but the texts don't call this easy. Buddha later created a rule because of this. Children cannot be ordained without parental permission. But Rahula, already done. This moment became precedent. Your dad shows up after 7 years and his first move is to make you join his order. Never asked what you wanted. Never asked how you felt. He recruited you. Your father didn't come back to love you. He came back to take you, saving you from the life you were born into. And the terrifying part? He believed he was saving you. Was this compassion or cruelty? From Buddha's view, the throne was another loop in samsara. The robes were the exit. But 7-year-old Rahula didn't ask for liberation. He asked for his inheritance. The texts don't say whether Rahula understood. Scissors cut Rahula's hair. Black locks fell to the stone floor. Robes replaced silk. The court gasped. Buddha was already walking away. In one moment, Rahula lost his father, again now to the Sangha. His inheritance, the throne, went to cousins. His childhood, he became a monk at 7. His identity, no longer prince, now beggar. Buddha believed he was giving Rahula something greater. What happened next determines everything, because now the boy who wanted a father has to live under a teacher. "7 years old, shaved head, brown robes, begging bowl. Your father is the Buddha. Your teacher is Shariputra, not a babysitter, the sharpest mind in the Sangha. And now he's teaching a child." Rahula became the training model for all future child monks. He lived in the Sangha, studied under Shariputra, practiced meditation, learned suttas, begged for alms in the streets of Kapilavatthu. He struggled at first. He's 7. This is brutal. A bowl in his hands, hunger in his belly. This is the part nobody tells you. Buddha didn't return as a father, but he did return as a teacher. Buddha gave Rahula 3 lessons. Father finally teaching son. The mirror lesson. Examine every action before, during, after. Will this cause harm? The breath meditation. In, out, observing, letting go. The breath he was born with becomes the breath he trains until it steadies him. The lesson on not self. Everything is impermanent, including you, even the identity of abandoned son, even the hurt. The relationship transformed through practice, through study. Early sources show distance, formality, teacher, and student. Later sources suggest warmth. Buddha praised Rahula's meditation practice publicly. But the path wasn't smooth. Sources preserve moments of rebellion. Rāhula lying to protect his father from visitors. Small lie, normal kid testing boundaries. Buddha found out. He called Rāhula, filled a bowl with water, made him watch as he poured it out. From the Ambalatikara Hulavada Sutta, Buddha asked, Rāhula, do you see this little water left in the bowl? Yes, venerable sir. So little, Rāhula, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Then he flipped the bowl upside down. Empty. The recluseship of a liar is thrown away, Rāhula. Empty, useless, wasted. He never lied again. At least, not that the sources record. If you've ever lied to protect someone you love, you know that moment. Rāhula excelled. He became known for his eagerness to learn. Other monks respected him, not because he's Buddha's son, but because he earned his place. In his training, Rāhula stopped being the abandoned prince, started being Rāhula the practitioner, the identity shift that changes everything. The Pali Canon records it simply. Rāhula became an arahant. He was likely one of the youngest to achieve it in the early Sangha. Whether Rāhula became enlightened matters less than how he lived with what happened to him. The son found what the father found. Rāhula became an arahant, but what happened to him changed Buddhism forever. Rāhula doesn't just survive it, he changes the rules of the world he enters. 3 consequences. First, the Sangha pushes back. Complaints arose. Children can't handle monastic discipline. Buddha responded with age requirements. Later traditions drew different lines. Some said novice training first, some set minimum ages. The details vary, but the controversy started here. Second, family pushes back. King Shuddhadana's fury led to concrete change. Buddha instituted a new rule. Children cannot be ordained without both parents' permission. That rule echoes across Buddhist traditions to this day: Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. Rāhula's ordination was the exception that created the rule. Third, teaching evolves. Because Rāhula was so young, new methods developed: the mirror lesson, the breath meditation, the approaches we still use. Later, monastic education carries traces of what was shaped here. Rāhula as teacher. Buddhist tradition preserves his epithet. In the Anguttara Nikaya, Buddha declared him etadagam sikakamanam, foremost among those willing to train. Not foremost in wisdom, not in miracles, in training. Among all Buddha's disciples, this was his distinction. He taught other young monks who entered the Sangha. Later tradition says he specialized in guiding meditation beginners. His own experience as a child monk made him effective. He understood the confusion, the doubt, the longing for something you can't quite name. And then Rāhula died before his father. Sources don't specify when or how. Scholars estimate he died in his late 20s or early 30s, relatively young even for that era. Some later traditions mention illness. What we know? Buddha outlived his son. The man who walked away when Rāhula was born had to stay and watch him die. Enlightenment doesn't cancel the human part. How he's remembered. In Theravada Buddhism, Rāhula is remembered as an exemplar of both filial piety and renunciation. His story teaches letting go of family attachments, venerated as an arahant who mastered early training. In Mahayana Buddhism, some traditions elevate him to bodhisattva status. Stories of his previous lives developed, symbol of transformation through practice. In art, Thai temples, Chinese scrolls, Japanese statues, he's depicted as a young monk alongside Buddha, sometimes shown with Yasodhara in family groupings, all different, all showing the same boy, all interpreting what his story means. Rāhula becomes Buddhism's answer to family ethics. Can you be enlightened and a parent? Can you pursue the path and honor family bonds? His story gets used by both sides of these debates. It doesn't resolve these questions. It holds the tension. Every serious Buddhist conversation about ordaining children traces back to him. Every rule about parental consent, his legacy. Every debate about family and practice circles back to this story. The boy named Fetter didn't break his own chains alone. He rewrote the rules for everyone who came after. Rāhula was hurt. Rāhula transformed. Both are true. They don't cancel each other out. Rāhula was born to inherit a kingdom. He didn't get it. Sometimes what you don't get makes room for what you actually need. But that doesn't make the loss less real. Buddha and Rāhula's relationship wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, complicated. It transformed through practice, through teaching, through seeing clearly. But they didn't come back together as a family. They came to see clearly, each in their own way. Rāhula is described as foremost among those willing to train, respected elder monk, teacher to others. The boy named Fetter broke every chain. The son who lost a kingdom found something else, not despite his story, through it. If you haven't watched our video on Buddha's wife Yasodhara, Rāhula's mother, go watch it next. Her story completes this picture. This is a family that didn't reunite, but each one found clarity. They saw through suffering, each in their own way. Rāhula's story says, the path you're on might not be the one you expected, but watch where it leads. Question for you. What absence shaped you more than any gift, and what did it make you become? One sentence is enough. Drop it in the comments. I read all of them. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone with parent wounds. Someone wondering if they're on the wrong path. Subscribe for more untold stories from Buddhist history. Hit the bell. And remember, you might be named Fetter, but you don't have to stay one. See you next time.